June 4th, 1943. Camp Hearn, Texas. The eating utensil quivered in Unoffizier Wilhelm Hoffmann's grasp as he gazed at the unbelievable sustenance arrayed before him. A hearty beef stew featuring actual substantial pieces of meat, larger than his entire weekly allotment in the African theater, alongside vibrant, unblemished vegetables and a loaf of pristine white bread, crafted from actual wheat instead of pulverized wood, accompanied by a chalice of chilled milk that seemed to radiate its own light under the Texan sun. "This cannot be real," he penned in a missive destined for his mother in a war-torn Hamburg 6 months hence. "They are presenting us with mock sustenance. Tomorrow we shall receive watery turnip broth, as is the norm." Surrounding him, 1,850 German servicemen, captives from the defeated Afrika Korps of the Reich, sat in shared astonishment within the refectory, erected in a mere 90 days. These men, who had subsisted on a meager 200 grams of sawdust-laden bread and thin, flavorless soup, now confronted portions that could have nourished an entire Wehrmacht company for 3 days. The metallic symphony of cutlery-striking platters had fallen silent. Some men wept, others remained inert, incapable of reconciling the opulence before them with 3 years of Nazi propaganda depicting a starving, collapsing America. What these combatants failed to grasp was their witnessing the agricultural and industrial prowess of a nation that generated more victuals than it could possibly consume, all while maintaining a fighting force of 12 million men under arms and dispatching 17 million tons of humanitarian aid to its allies. The profound shift initiated by this initial repast would ultimately dismantle every preconceit they held regarding American feebleness, German superiority, and the supposed predestined victory of the Third Reich. To apprehend the psychological impact of American material sufficiency, one must first comprehend the depths of privation from which these soldiers emerged. By 1943, the German sustenance allocation system had devolved into a tortuous stratification of hunger. German civilians, if fortunate, received 1,700 calories daily. Field soldiers were promised 3,600 calories, but seldom attained even half that amount. In North Africa, where the majority of the initial prisoners were apprehended, the circumstances had grown dire. Feldwehrer Müller, captured with the 21st Panzer Division in Tunisia, maintained a journal that has since been preserved by his family. His final entry prior to capture read, May 11th, 1943. Division meal today, 150 grams of black bread, largely composed of sawdust, 15 grams of rancid margarine, soup rendered from a solitary potato and dessert scrub. The Italians possess nothing. We are consuming our steeds. The Afrika Korps, once the jewel of the Wehrmacht, had been reduced to spectral figures by the time of their capitulation. Rommel himself had repeatedly conveyed his consternation to Berlin regarding the insurmountable logistical challenges. Supply vessels laden with foodstuffs were annihilated by Allied aerial and submarine assaults. Whatever meager provisions did arrive were frequently spoiled by the oppressive heat. By early 1943, German combatants in North Africa were afflicted with scurvy, beriberi, and protein deficiency ailments, diseases that Wehrmacht medical personnel had not encountered since the First World War. Oberleutnant Friedrich Bauer, a medical officer taken prisoner at the Kasserine Pass, documented this decline. The soldiers' gums bled perpetually due to scurvy. Night blindness, stemming from vitamin A deficiency, affected 30% of the troops. Edema, a consequence of protein starvation, caused their limbs to swell. We had become an army of walking specters. The surrender in Tunisia, on May 13th, 1943, brought 275,000 Axis soldiers into Allied custody. Among them were the elite of the German military, seasoned warriors who had subjugated France, driven the British to the brink of annihilation, and harbored an unshakable conviction in German racial supremacy and American moral decay. The initial shock manifested almost immediately at the temporary assembly points in North Africa. American quartermasters distributed C rations and K rations to the captives. These combat rations, which American soldiers frequently decried, appeared as miraculous fare to the Germans. Unteroffizier Karl Schmidt, captured with the 95th Light Division, wrote, "The Americans presented us with small boxes they designated K rations. Within lay more sustenance than I had seen in 2 months, crackers that were free of mold, a tin of meat that was genuinely meat, chocolate, sugar, even tobacco products." They offered apologies, stating this was all they had. Apologies. The voyage to America aboard Liberty ships marked the second revelation. These vessels, churned out from American shipyards at a velocity that German naval officers would have deemed impossible, were returning from delivering vital supplies to Europe. Instead of sailing back empty, they conveyed human cargo. Within the holds, hastily converted for prisoner transport, German soldiers encountered American abundance in its most commonplace manifestation. Gefreiter Hans Weber recalled, "The American sailors discarded more food after each meal than my entire company had consumed in a week. Entire loaves of white bread, barely touched, were relegated to the refuse. Sailors grumbled about having chicken too frequently. One individual crushed a chocolate bar underfoot because it had softened slightly. We fought amongst ourselves to sift through their garbage." Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia, August 1943. As the prisoners disembarked, they were confronted with a spectacle that utterly shattered their perception of wartime reality. Dock workers, many of them women and African Americans whom Nazi ideology had deemed incapable of skilled employment, unloaded vessels while partaking in sandwiches generously layered with meat and cheese. They imbibed Coca-Cola, casually discarding the bottles into receptacles. They continuously smoked cigarettes, extinguishing them only partially consumed. At the processing station, each prisoner underwent a medical evaluation that incorporated an unprecedented element: vitamin supplements to address their profound nutritional deficiencies. German medical officers, themselves prisoners, labored alongside American physicians who treated cases of malnutrition resembling those of concentration camp internees rather than enemy combatants. Major William Patterson, a United States Army medical officer at Norfolk, reported, "The Germans arrived in a state of acute malnutrition. Their average weight was 30 pounds below normal. Scurvy, pellagra, beriberi, diseases of starvation that we had only encountered in academic texts. We immediately initiated a gradual feeding regimen to avert refeeding syndrome." The train journey to the inland encampments provided a 3-day immersion into America's agricultural bounty. As the trains traversed Virginia's Shenandoah Valley, prisoners pressed against the windows, observing endless orchards heavy with apples, vast expanses of corn stretching to the horizon, and dairy farms dotted with herds of well-fed cattle. Every small township boasted a grocery store with fully stocked windows, eateries advertising daily specials, and ice cream parlors with patrons queuing for treats. The American prisoner of war camp system would eventually house 425,000 German captives, with 371,683 present at its zenith in May 1945. These individuals were dispersed across 700 camps in 46 states. Texas alone accommodated approximately 50,000 German POWs in numerous facilities, leveraging the state's climate, which the Geneva Convention stipulated should approximate that of the prisoner's capture location. Camp Hearn, Texas, one of the initial sites to receive Afrika Korps personnel, had been constructed in just 4 months and possessed a capacity for 4,800 POWs. It offered amenities that surpassed the provisions available to most German soldiers, even as civilians. Electric illumination, heated water systems, flush sanitation, recreational halls, and, most remarkably, dining facilities that dispensed 3 hot meals daily. The menu for the inaugural full day, June 5, 1943, has been meticulously preserved in the camp archives. Breakfast, oatmeal with milk and sugar, scrambled eggs, bacon, toast accompanied by butter and jam, coffee with cream and sugar, and orange juice. Lunch: vegetable soup, roasted pork with gravy, mashed potatoes, carrots, bread and butter, apple pie and milk. Dinner: fried chicken, rice, green beans, cornbread, fruit salad, and coffee. This single day's culinary offering amounted to approximately 3,500 calories, exceeding the daily intake of German civilians by a considerable margin. The quantity of meat alone surpassed the monthly meat ration allocated to German civilians. Obergefreiter Hermann Richer, a former factory laborer from the Ruhr, penned, "I consumed until I felt unwell. Then I ate more. We all did." Some individuals secreted bread within their sleeping quarters, convinced this abundance would inevitably cease. The American guards chuckled and assured us it would be the same tomorrow and the day after. We remained unconvinced. The sheer volume of sustenance within American POW facilities proved more effective in dismantling Nazi ideology than any propaganda campaign could have achieved. These servicemen had been indoctrinated with the notion that America was feeble, fractured, and teetering on the precipice of collapse. Yet here they were, being nourished more lavishly than Wehrmacht officers, all while America waged a war on two fronts. The camp canteen evolved into a portal into American consumerism. With their 80 cents earned daily for labor, prisoners could procure items that had vanished from Germany years prior. Chocolate bars, cigarettes, razor blades, soap, toothpaste, stationery, and, astonishingly, ice cream. The canteen at Camp Herne dispensed 5,000 ice cream bars weekly to German prisoners who had not savored ice cream since before the war. Gefreiter Fritz Müller wrote to his wife, "Yesterday I purchased ice cream." Ice cream. In Germany, even party officials cannot obtain ice cream, but here, enemy prisoners acquire it for 5 cents. The Americans possess such an abundance of cocoa that they provide it to prisoners. The therapeutic feeding program for undernourished captives unveiled America's medical opulence. Prisoners received vitamin injections, nutritional supplements, and specialized diets to combat deficiency-related ailments. The camp infirmaries were stocked with more medical provisions than most German field hospitals. Penicillin, that miraculous medication which Germany could not manufacture, was administered freely for prisoner infections. Dr. Hinrich Schmidt, a captured Wehrmacht medical officer, wrote, "They provided us with vitamins in vials, hundreds of pills akin to confectionery. In Germany, we lacked vitamins for our own injured personnel. Here, enemy prisoners receive superior medical attention than German civilians could ever envision." By October 1943, labor shortages necessitated the employment of POWs on American farms and in food processing facilities. This direct exposure to American agricultural and industrial food production served as the final blow to their ideological indoctrination. At a cotton gin near Houston, prisoners witnessed mechanized harvesting that defied comprehension. A solitary picking machine accomplished the work of 50 men. The gin processed more cotton in a single day than German textile mills processed in a month. However, it was the casual profusion that truly astounded them. Field laborers, including African-American workers, whom Nazi ideology had branded as subhuman, consumed midday meals that would have constituted banquets in Germany. Thick sandwiches of beef or ham, whole apples, slices of pie, thermoses of coffee with genuine cream. They discarded partially eaten food without a second thought. Unteroffizier Johann Kellner, laboring on a farm near Jackson, Mississippi, wrote, "The Negro workers consume meat daily, white bread, fruit. One discarded an entire apple because it bore a minor blemish. In Germany, people would contend for that apple." At a Del Monte processing plant in California, prisoners observed trainloads of peaches transformed into canned fruit, utilizing technology that was non-existent in Germany. The facility processed more fruit in a single day than Germany imported annually. Workers imbibed orange juice as if it were water. Damaged fruit, which would have been cherished in Germany, was discarded by the ton. Nothing shocked German POWs more profoundly than American meat consumption. In Germany, civilians received 250 grams of meat weekly when available. German soldiers were purportedly entitled to 150 grams daily, but rarely received it. In American POW camps, prisoners were served meat 2 or 3 times daily. The quality astonished them even more than the quantity. Not horse meat, not ambiguously labeled canned substances, but recognizable cuts of beef, pork, and chicken. Camp Shelby in Mississippi, which housed 5,300 German POWs at its peak, procured 14,000 pounds of meat weekly. The butchery prepared steaks, ground hamburger, and roasted meats with a casualness that seemed almost sacrilegious to men who had witnessed their families slowly starve. Obergefreiter Paul Fischer wrote, "Today for Sunday dinner we had roast beef, a slab as thick as my thumb. The Americans complained it was tough. In Germany, this would be wedding feast fare. My children have never beheld such meat." The prisoners working at Swift & Company's meatpacking plant in Fort Worth witnessed the full scope of American meat production. The facility processed 5,000 cattle daily. Workers departed with packages of beef that would have cost a German laborer a month's wages. "The waste was magnificent," wrote Hilfsgerman Kurt Zimmermann. "They discarded meat for having an excessive fat content, which would have been a treasure in Germany. One plant produced more meat in a week than Bavaria sees in an entire year." German POWs had subsisted for years on preserved vegetables, sauerkraut, pickled beets, and dried legumes. Fresh fruit had become a distant memory, accessible only to the party elite. In American camps, fresh produce arrived daily. The psychological impact of fresh oranges at breakfast cannot be overstated. Oranges, tropical fruit in June in Texas, available to enemy prisoners. The camps received regular consignments of apples, peaches, pears, grapes, and even bananas, fruits that most Germans had not seen since prior to the war. Unteroffizier Wilhelm Becker wrote, "They served us oranges at breakfast, not for special occasions, but daily if we desired. The vitamin C cured my bleeding gums within a week. We consumed more fruit as prisoners than German children see in an entire year." The vegetable variety seemed virtually limitless: lettuce, tomatoes, corn, beans, peas, carrots, potatoes, onions, cabbage, squash. Fresh, not preserved. Camp Hearn maintained a 50-acre vegetable garden, cultivated by prisoners who marveled at the productivity of American soil and farming techniques. Working on farms, prisoners encountered agricultural abundance that challenged their conceptions of possibility. In California's Central Valley, where some POWs were relocated for agricultural labor, they harvested fruit from orchards stretching for miles. They watched in dismay as perfectly good fruit was discarded for minor blemishes or deliberately destroyed to maintain market prices. In Germany, chocolate had vanished by 1941, replaced by Ursa chocolate, crafted from roasted acorns and beet sugar. Genuine chocolate was rarer than precious metals. Sugar was rationed to 200 grams monthly for civilians. In American POW camps, chocolate and confections were everyday items. The Camp PX, or Post Exchange, offered Hershey bars, Baby Ruth, Snickers, and Milky Way, brand names that would become legendary among repatriated POWs. The psychological impact of this casual availability of luxury foodstuffs cannot be overstated. Obergefreiter Kurt Wagner wrote, "I purchased 5 chocolate bars with a single day's earnings. In Germany, all the wealth in the world cannot procure 1 genuine chocolate bar. What manner of affluence permits enemies to purchase chocolate daily?" The camp kitchens prepared desserts daily: pies, cakes, cookies, puddings. Sugar was employed liberally in coffee, on cereal, and in desserts. The prisoners, many suffering from years of sugar deprivation, initially made themselves ill from the sheer quantity of sweets. milk, butter, cheese, cream. Dairy products that had virtually disappeared from German diets appeared in abundance in American POW camps. Fresh milk at every meal, butter for bread, cheese sandwiches, ice cream. The calcium and protein derived from dairy products rapidly improved the prisoners' health. In Germany, milk was reserved for infants and expectant mothers when available. Butter was a black market commodity. Cheese was a distant recollection. At Camp Herne, the dairy delivered 500 gallons of milk daily. Prisoners who had not tasted fresh milk in years drank it as if it were a medicinal elixir. Unteroffizier Franz Weber wrote, "I drank a full glass of cold milk today. Real milk, not powdered, not condensed. It tasted of peace, of childhood, of all that we had lost." German coffee by 1943 was synthesized from roasted barley, acorns, or chicory, bitter surrogates bearing no resemblance to authentic coffee. In American POW camps, genuine coffee flowed as freely as water. The psychological impact of unlimited coffee cannot be understated for a culture that had elevated coffee to a cornerstone of social interaction. The aroma of brewing coffee in the morning, the casual refills at every meal, the ability to partake in coffee with genuine cream and sugar, these modest luxuries delivered devastating blows to Nazi propaganda. Gefreiter Friedrich Timmen wrote, "The Americans consume coffee all day long. Real coffee from Brazil with cream and sugar. In Germany, my mother stretches 50 grams of Erbsensuppe for days." The fundamental staple of the German diet became another testament to American abundance. German bread by 1943 was a dark, dense composite of rye, potato flour, and sawdust, rationed to 2,000 grams weekly for manual laborers. It frequently arrived moldy. In American POW camps, fresh white bread appeared at every meal. The camp bakery at Camp Shelby produced 10,000 loaves weekly. Soft, white wheat bread that Germans associated with luxury, prisoners could consume as much as they desired. Gefreiter Paul Schmidt wrote, "White bread as soft as cake, fresh every day. We can take as many slices as we wish." In Germany, people face execution for stealing bread. As prisoners were permitted to correspond with their families, their letters became conduits of devastating truth, which German censors struggled to suppress. How could they articulate to families subsisting on turnip soup that they, as captives, were consuming meat 3 times daily? Many prisoners initially fabricated their letters, unwilling to burden their starving relatives with the stark reality. Others remitted their entire earnings home to procure sustenance on the black market, comprehending that their monthly wages could acquire what their families could not obtain with ration cards. Unteroffizier Karl Hoffmann's letter to his wife, intercepted by German censors, read, "My beloved Greta, I am well nourished here. Do not concern yourself about me. The Americans possess more provisions than they know what to do with. I comprehend now why they fight. They are safeguarding paradise." What astonished German POWs even more than the abundance was American adaptability in catering to dietary requirements. Prisoners with medical conditions received specialized diets. Diabetics were provided with sugar-free meals. Those suffering from ulcers were given bland regimens. This individualized care for enemy prisoners surpassed what German hospitals could offer their own wounded. The Americans even endeavored to provide culturally familiar foodstuffs. They procured rye flour for dark bread, sauerkraut, and other German preferences. This deference to individual dietary needs starkly contrasted with Nazi collectivist principles. Dr. Wilhelm Braun, senior German medical officer at Camp Shelby, wrote, "The Americans expend more effort accommodating the dietary needs of enemy prisoners than the Wehrmacht expends in feeding its own soldiers." As an increasing number of prisoners engaged in labor on American farms, they received an education in agricultural productivity that would fundamentally reshape post-war Germany. They acquired knowledge of crop rotation, chemical fertilizers, mechanized farming, and irrigation. They observed yields that German agriculture could not attain even during peacetime. Working on a wheat farm in Kansas, Obergefreiter Hermann Weber discovered that a solitary American farmer, equipped with machinery, could cultivate 640 acres, a tract of land that would necessitate an entire German village to work. The combine harvester could process 100 acres of wheat daily. The American farmer I worked for produced more sustenance than my entire district in Bavaria, Weber wrote. He accomplished this with machinery, chemicals, and scientific methodologies previously unknown to us. November 25, 1943, heralded another psychological upheaval: Thanksgiving dinner. The prisoners lacked any frame of reference for this American observance, yet they recognized abundance when it was presented. The repast served at Camp Hearn that day comprised roast turkey with stuffing, mashed potatoes with gravy, sweet potatoes with marshmallows, green bean casserole, cranberry sauce, rolls with butter, pumpkin pie, apple pie, coffee, and milk. Each prisoner received portions that would have sustained a German family for an entire week. The turkey alone exceeded the monthly German meat ration. The Americans marked a special occasion by treating their captured adversaries with the generosity typically reserved for esteemed guests. Kurt Zimmerman penned that if every American household was partaking in such lavish meals, then the United States was not merely a nation, but a veritable utopia. During their internment, prisoners toiled in American food preservation facilities, witnessing industrial-scale food processing techniques far beyond Germany's capabilities. At the Campbell Soup Company in Camden, New Jersey, they observed an operation that churned out 10 million cans of soup annually. The relentless pace of the production lines, filling cans with meats and vegetables that were scarce in German factories, astonished them. The advanced technology, including automated peeling machinery, continuous cooking systems, and vacuum sealing devices, left them awestruck. Yet, even more striking was the rigorous commitment to quality. Any can with the slightest imperfection, such as a minor dent, was discarded. The volume of perfectly good food rejected due to trivial cosmetic flaws surpassed Germany's entire food output. Ice cream emerged as the ultimate emblem of American excess. In Germany, ice cream had been a rare indulgence even before the war, becoming entirely unattainable during wartime. However, within the American prisoner of war camps, ice cream was a commonplace treat. Camp Shelby boasted an ice cream machine capable of producing 50 gallons each day during the warmer months. Prisoners could purchase ice cream bars, cones, and cups from the camp canteen. The profound emotional impact of knowing that their enemies were enjoying ice cream while German children had never even tasted it proved utterly devastating. A writer named Hans Meer noted in his journal, "Today I savored chocolate ice cream. Such a luxury is unthinkable in Germany, even for the affluent. Here, prisoners of war can procure it for mere pocket change." American medical officers meticulously documented the remarkable improvements in the prisoners' physical condition due to adequate nutrition. Within 3 months of their arrival, the average prisoner gained between 25 and 30 pounds. Scurvy vanished, night blindness was corrected, and protein-induced edema receded. Major Robert Harrison, the chief medical officer at Camp Shelby, reported, "The German prisoners arrived looking like survivors of concentration camps, gaunt, unwell, and mentally distressed from prolonged hunger. 3 months of proper nourishment transformed them into robust young men." The prisoners themselves struggled to comprehend their physical resurgence. Their muscles regained strength, their energy levels soared, and the mental fog caused by malnutrition dissipated. Gazing into mirrors, they saw reflections of their former selves, the individuals they were before the war. As their health improved and their hunger subsided, many prisoners grappled with overwhelming guilt concerning their families' suffering. How could they enjoy 3 meals a day while their children were starving? The stark reality that Germany's adversaries were providing them with better sustenance than their own government was to its citizens was too agonizing to confront. An unsent letter from Unteroffizier Paul Fischer, discovered after the war, revealed his anguish. "My dearest wife, I cannot bring myself to tell you the truth. I dine on meat daily while you endure hunger. I am safe while you face bombardment. The Americans treat me with greater kindness than our own government treats you." The Christmas of 1943 delivered another significant psychological blow. American church groups, civic organizations, and the Red Cross dispatched 500,000 Christmas packages to German prisoners of war. Each package contained an assortment of chocolates, cookies, canned goods, cigarettes, and toiletries. Local communities further augmented these provisions with homemade items, hand-knitted scarves, hand-drawn cards, and cookies baked by ladies from their churches. These packages were distributed without any consideration for rank or political allegiance. This act of selfless generosity from an enemy whose sons and brothers were actively engaged in combat and dying in Europe irrevocably shattered the foundations of Nazi racial ideology. Headman Vera Klein observed, "American civilians, whose sons we were attempting to kill mere months ago, have sent us Christmas gifts. Churches have offered prayers for our well-being. Children have sent cards wishing us a Merry Christmas. Only a people absolutely assured of their victory would extend such compassion to their adversaries." By the early part of 1944, the food supplied in American prisoner of war camps had inadvertently become an educational institution. The prisoners gained knowledge about nutrition, essential vitamins, balanced diets, and food safety practices. They discovered that adequate nourishment not only enhanced their physical health, but also boosted their productivity, improved their mood, and sharpened their mental acuity. The camp libraries were well stocked with American agricultural journals and cookbooks. Prisoners eagerly studied American farming techniques, food processing methods, and nutritional science. They learned that America's agricultural bounty was not a matter of chance, but the result of scientific cultivation, mechanization, and efficient distribution networks. Oberritter Friedrich Becker, a former agricultural student, remarked, "The Americans have elevated farming to the level of a science. They meticulously test their soil, develop superior crop varieties, and employ chemical advancements to maximize yields. It is no wonder they possess such an abundance of food." As 1944 wore on, and news from Germany grew increasingly grim, the stark disparity between the plentiful provisions in the American camps and the widespread starvation in Germany became unbearable. Letters that managed to elude censorship spoke of cities reduced to rubble, civilians subsisting on grass soup, and children succumbing to famine. Meanwhile, German prisoners of war in America lodged complaints about the monotony of their meals. The ideological underpinnings of Nazism began to crumble in the face of American abundance. How could the supposed master race be suffering from hunger while their so-called inferior enemies were squandering food? The black man who emptied their refuse bins ate better than German officers. The ideology was effectively dead, vanquished by palpable reality. The summer of 1944 brought new revelations as prisoners participated in America's peak agricultural season, laboring in Georgia's peach orchards, harvesting vegetables in New Jersey, and toiling in the wheat fields of Kansas. The sheer magnitude of food production overwhelmed them. On a single day in a Georgia peach orchard, the prisoners picked enough fruit to sustain a German city for an entire month. Flawless peaches were meticulously sorted by size and quality. Fruits with minor blemishes were diverted to canneries, while damaged produce was either discarded or fed to the pigs. Geraint Wilhelm Hoffmann noted, "Today we fed peaches to pigs. Thousands of peaches, too ripe for shipment, were given to swine." In Germany, people would lament such a waste of perfectly good fruit. An incident at Camp Shelby in July of 1944 vividly illustrated the psychological impact of American abundance. Local farmers generously donated truckloads of watermelons for a 4th of July celebration. The German prisoners of war had never encountered watermelons before. This exotic fruit was virtually unknown in Germany. The prisoners were given entire watermelons to share. Many were unfamiliar with how to eat them. Some prisoners were moved to tears by the overwhelming sweetness, the sheer quantity of pure sugar and water encapsulated in fruit form. Untrizier Carl Schmidt wrote, "They presented us with enormous green fruits filled with sweet red flesh. Each one could have fed an entire family. The Americans consumed the centers and discarded the remainder." A nation that possesses the capacity to waste food as a form of entertainment has, in essence, already achieved victory. Working in the cornfields of Iowa provided another agricultural revelation. Iowa alone produced more corn than all of Germany's combined grain output. Most astonishingly, the vast majority of this corn was destined for animal feed, not direct human consumption. The concept of cultivating food solely to nourish animals, thereby producing meat, was a luxury Germany could not afford. In America, prime agricultural land was dedicated to the production of animal feed, a clear demonstration of an agricultural abundance that seemed utterly unattainable. Feldwebel Hermann Fischer wrote, "The farmer explained that their corn cultivation is primarily for pigs and cattle. They grow food specifically to feed livestock, thereby producing meat. The Americans possess such an immense quantity of grain that they can afford to convert it into meat." At a sugar beet processing plant in Colorado, German prisoners of war witnessed sugar production on a scale that defied comprehension. Germany faced severe sugar shortages, with civilians receiving a meager 200 grams per month. The Colorado facility processed 5,000 tons of sugar beets daily, yielding mountainous quantities of refined white sugar. Workers at the plant received 5-pound bags of sugar as a portion of their wages. They incorporated sugar liberally into their coffee, sprinkled it on their cereal, and used it extensively in their baking. The casual consumption of pure sugar by ordinary workers presented another devastating point of comparison. Oberreiter Paul Wuber recounted, "I observed a worker pour nearly half a cup of sugar into his coffee. This single act represented 2 months' worth of a German sugar ration dissolved into 1 cup. German prisoners of war employed at Gulf Coast ports witnessed American fishing fleets returning with catches that dwarfed the output of the entire German fishing industry. Shrimp boats would discard tons of bycatch, perfectly edible fish tossed back into the ocean simply because they were not the targeted species. At Galveston, prisoners watched shrimpers discard more fish in a single day than German fishing fleets managed to catch in an entire week. The notion of discarding food because it was not the preferred type was utterly incomprehensible. Gerrit Hans Müller commented, "They threw away tons of fish because they were the wrong kind." In Germany, people would fight over fish heads. On dairy farms in Wisconsin, German prisoners of war encountered milk production levels that seemed impossible. Individual farms produced more milk daily than entire German districts. The technology employed, including mechanical milkers, refrigerated storage tanks, and pasteurization equipment, was decades ahead of German agricultural practices. Most shocking, however, was the casual waste. Milk that was not perfectly fresh was routinely dumped. Cream was separated and utilized liberally. Butter was churned in quantities that could have supplied entire German cities. Unterpizzier Fritz Wagner wrote, "The farm where I work produces 1,000 gallons of milk each day. Just one farm. They pour excess milk onto the fields as fertilizer." At an egg farm in Maryland, prisoners encountered industrial-scale egg production, a concept entirely unknown in Germany. The farm housed 50,000 chickens, yielding 40,000 eggs daily. Automated systems handled the collection, washing, and sorting of the eggs. Germans typically received 1 egg per week on their ration cards, if available. American prisoners of war, however, were provided with eggs daily at breakfast. The Maryland farm shipped trainloads of eggs to urban centers. Gerreiter Wilhelm Becker stated, "Each structure on the farm housed more birds than our entire village. They discarded more cracked eggs daily than Germany produces in total." The Thanksgiving celebration of 1944 proved to be even more abundant than the previous year, despite America's engagement on 2 major fronts. The meals served to German prisoners of war had not only been maintained, but had actually expanded. The menu featured turkey, ham, roast beef, mashed potatoes, sweet potatoes, stuffing, gravy, green beans, corn, cranberry sauce, 3 varieties of pie, ice cream, coffee, milk, and wine. The prisoners sat in stunned silence. Their homeland was facing starvation, its cities in ruins, its children surviving on grass soup. Yet, America was providing its German prisoners with a feast that surpassed even pre-war German celebratory banquets. Headman Vera Mueller remarked, "The Americans possess such an abundance of food that they can nourish their enemies better than we ourselves were nourished even in peacetime. They conquered us with their food long before their armies ever arrived." By the end of 1944, many prisoners ceased writing home about food. The guilt had become unbearable. Hidden diaries and unsent letters, uncovered after the war, revealed the profound psychological torment of experiencing such abundance while their families suffered deprivation. Feldable Otto Schmidt's unsent letter read, "I dreamt I could send you a single American meal. The meat from my lunch could sustain you for an entire week. I am in paradise while you are in hell." As 1945 commenced and reports of Germany's imminent collapse reached the camps, the stark contrast became almost surreal. Prisoners learned of the failure of the Ardennes offensive while partaking in their New Year's dinner. They heard accounts of German cities devoid of food, heat, or water, all while sitting in comfortably heated mess halls. American newspapers displayed photographs of starving German civilians, children suffering from rickets and distended bellies due to malnutrition. The prisoners recognized their own families in these poignant images. Oberreiter Hans Fischer wrote, "The newspaper depicts German children consuming soup made from grass. I enjoyed bacon for breakfast. My young son Klaus is eating grass while I consume meat." When Germany surrendered on the 8th of May 1945, German prisoners of war in American camps faced a grim irony. The war's conclusion meant their eventual return to a devastated, famished nation. Many harbored no desire to depart. The camps had, in effect, become havens, offering refuge from the starvation that awaited them back home. The United States military initiated programs to train prisoners of war in food production and preservation techniques, skills that could aid in the rebuilding of Germany. Prisoners received instruction in canning, agricultural practices, nutrition, and food distribution. Major General Louis Lurch, overseeing prisoner of war operations, stated, "These men have witnessed American abundance. They understand that it is achievable. They will return to Germany, equipped with knowledge that can help prevent future famines." As repatriation neared in late 1945 and early 1946, German prisoners of war confronted a cruel paradox. They had to prepare themselves for a transition from an environment of abundance to one of severe scarcity. Camp commanders implemented programs to gradually reduce rations, aiming to help the prisoners acclimatize to less plentiful provisions. Prisoners were taught methods of foraging, preparing soup from minimal ingredients, and preserving food without refrigeration. The very camps that had showcased abundance now served as institutions for teaching survival in scarcity. Dr. Wilhelm Hoffmann, the senior German medical officer, remarked, "We must reteach our men how to endure starvation. Their stomachs have become accustomed to larger portions, and a return to German rations may prove fatal for some." Prior to their repatriation, each camp hosted farewell dinners. The Americans provided final feasts that surpassed even the elaborate holiday meals. At Camp Shelby's farewell dinner in February of 1946, the menu included shrimp cocktail, prime rib, lobster tail, baked potato with butter and sour cream, asparagus, Caesar salad, chocolate cake, ice cream, wine, and coffee. Men openly wept, not from joy, but from the crushing realization that such culinary experiences might never be theirs again. Headman Friedrich Mueller wrote, "Our final American meal was more refined than any German feast I can recall. Tomorrow, we return to turnip soup and sawdust bread. America sent us home with full stomachs and broken hearts. The journey back to Germany revealed the full extent of the nation's devastation. As the trains crossed into German territory, prisoners pressed their faces against the windows, observing a landscape of ruins resembling a moonscape. Civilians at the train stations were emaciated figures, begging for food that the returning prisoners did not possess. At Frankfurt Station, returning prisoners of war witnessed German civilians scrambling for discarded scraps from Allied military trains. Children with swollen bellies, victims of malnutrition, pleaded for chocolate that was nowhere to be found. Unificia Polvber wrote, "We returned to hell. My wife initially thought I was an imposter. I was far too healthy, far too well fed. My son, born during my absence, suffers from rickets due to malnutrition. The shame is unbearable." Despite the trauma of their return, former prisoners of war became instrumental in Germany's recovery. They brought with them knowledge of American agricultural techniques, food preservation methods, and nutritional science. They understood that abundance was attainable because they had personally experienced it. Many former prisoners went on to become leaders in German agricultural reform. They introduced mechanization, chemical fertilizers, and scientific farming practices acquired in America. They knew that reconstruction was feasible because they had witnessed a society that had already achieved it. Hans Müller, formerly an Oberreiter, became an agricultural advisor in Bavaria. He wrote, "We learned in American fields what German schools had never taught us, that science and democracy are the architects of abundance." When the Marshall Plan was announced in 1947, former prisoners of war grasped its significance more profoundly than most Germans. They had personally experienced American generosity and abundance. They understood that America possessed the resources to rebuild Europe because they had witnessed the casual waste that demonstrated its virtually unlimited reserves. The food aid that began flowing into Germany seemed familiar to the former prisoners. The same abundance they had enjoyed during their captivity was now being extended to the entire nation. Wilhelm Schmidt, a former Feldwebel, wrote, "The Americans are feeding us again, this time as free men. They are sending wheat, milk powder, and canned goods, the very same food we consumed as prisoners." Studies conducted in the 1950s revealed that former prisoners of war who had been held in American camps exhibited significantly different attitudes compared to those captured by other powers. They were more inclined to support democracy, advocate for economic cooperation, and maintain positive perceptions of America. Their experiences with food had been profoundly transformative. These men had tasted abundance and desired it for Germany. They had learned that prosperity stemmed not from conquest, but from productive capacity, not from notions of racial superiority, but from advancements in agricultural science. Dr. Hans Richter, in his 1955 study of former prisoners of war, concluded that the American camps had inadvertently served as schools of democracy. Through the satisfaction of their hunger, prisoners came to understand what their ideology had sought to conceal, that democracy and capitalism could generate the abundance that fascism had only promised. During the 1960s and 70s, as former prisoners of war entered their later years, many chose to document their experiences. Their testimonies consistently underscored food as the most psychologically impactful element of their captivity. Vera Hoffman, a former headman, testified, "The Americans defeated us with food before their armies ever engaged. Every meal served as a lesson in their power. We surrendered to abundance long before we surrendered to Eisenhower." Kurt Müller, a former UN Raffizier, wrote, "I learned more about America through its food than through its literature. The casual waste demonstrated their surplus. The variety revealed their choices." In the 1980s, former German prisoners began returning to America for reunions. They revisited the camps where they had been interned, many of which had been repurposed. They reconnected with former guards and local civilians who remembered them. At a reunion held in 1985 at Camp Shelby, Former prisoner Hans Weber brought German beer to share with American veterans. He raised his glass in a toast. "You fed us when we were enemies. You showed us abundance when we knew only scarcity. We returned to Germany with full bellies and renewed aspirations." American Guard veteran Robert Johnson responded, "We simply provided you with what we ate ourselves. Nothing out of the ordinary. That's just how America is. What seems miraculous to those who have experienced want is merely commonplace to us." The figures illustrate the profound contrast between American agricultural might and German rations. Civilian rations in Germany from 1943 to 1945 included 2,000 grams of bread weekly, 250 grams of meat weekly when available, 100 grams of fats weekly, and 200 grams of sugar monthly. Adults received no milk, and eggs were limited to 1 per week if obtainable, with daily calorie intake ranging from 1,200 to 1,700. In stark contrast, German prisoners of war in American camps received unlimited bread, 350 grams of meat daily, butter daily, unlimited sugar in coffee and desserts, 1 quart of milk daily, and eggs at every breakfast, with daily calorie counts ranging from 3,500 to 4,000. The disparity was not merely quantitative, but also qualitative. German rations often comprised ersatz substitutes, spoiled provisions, and sawdust fillers. American rations, on the other hand, were fresh, varied, and of a quality superior to pre-war German standards. Post-war psychological studies indicated that German prisoners of war in American camps underwent a cognitive reconstruction fueled by their consumption experiences. The daily reality of abundance compelled them to reevaluate fundamental beliefs about American society, German superiority, and the very nature of national strength. Dr. Friedrich Braun's 1950 study concluded, "The prisoners underwent an involuntary ideological conversion through ingestion. Every meal served to contradict Nazi propaganda. These men were not brainwashed, but rather belly-washed, converted through consumption rather than coercion." This transformation was particularly profound because it was experiential, not merely theoretical. The prisoners did not read about American abundance, they consumed it. They did not hear about agricultural prowess, they participated in the harvests. Former prisoners of war introduced American food culture to post-war Germany. They brought back recipes learned in mess halls, cooking techniques shared by farm wives, and, most significantly, the ingrained expectation that abundance was an achievable reality. The emergence of the first German supermarkets in the 1950s was modeled on the American stores described by former prisoners of war. The concepts of food choice, aisles stocked with a wide variety of products, refrigerated sections, and frozen foods were all introduced as a result of their experiences in captivity. Even the eventual success of American fast food chains in Germany was partly paved by former prisoners who recalled hamburgers, hot dogs, and ice cream from their time as POWs. They had tasted casual abundance and desired it for their own nation. At the last major reunion of German prisoners of war in 1995, commemorating the 50th anniversary of the war's end, 89-year-old Otto Mueller delivered the keynote address. "We arrived in America as warriors of the master race, convinced of our superiority, certain of victory," he stated. "We departed as humbled men who had dined at the table of democracy. The Americans fed us not out of cruelty, showing us what we could not have, but out of generosity, sharing what they possessed in abundance." Each repast offered a revelation. Every satiated stomach furnished an education. We grasped that America's true might resided not within its military formations, but in its fields of grain. Not in its weaponry, but in its harvest of wheat. Not in its doctrines, but in its frozen confection. Indeed, the very ice cream. That improbable indulgence, a daily staple for American captives, while German youngsters languished in hunger. We journeyed back to our homeland, equipped with wisdom far surpassing covert military intelligence. We understood that prosperity was achievable, for we had experienced it firsthand. We recognized the efficacy of democratic governance, having savored its bounties. We perceived the superiority of tranquility over conflict, having sampled the realities of both. To the Americans who sustained us, your kindness proved a more potent conqueror than any army. Your donuts accomplished what tanks could not. Your coffee and cream brought about our conversion. We, who arrived as adversaries, departed as emissaries of your affluence. The sustenance you provided during our internment forged the bedrock of our camaraderie as allies. We extend our gratitude for nourishing us when we were famished, for extending clemency when we merited censure, for imparting the lesson that genuine strength emanates not from acquisition, but from bestowal. We partook of democracy, and it fundamentally reshaped us. The gathered assembly, comprising American and German veterans, alongside their kin, rose in a thunderous standing ovation, united by the collective memory of adversaries finding common ground over shared meals, of animosity dissipating amidst hospitality, of hostilities concluding not with retribution, but with vital sustenance. The narrative of German prisoners of war and American material abundance stands as one of history's most astonishing instances of inadvertent psychological influence. Without premeditation or overt persuasion, America triumphed over its foes through the straightforward act of providing them with ample food. The 425,000 German prisoners of war who passed through American facilities, with 371,683 present at the zenith, underwent a shared metamorphosis via consumption. They arrived as soldiers of the Nazi regime and departed as testaments to democratic plenty. They came holding firm to the conviction of German supremacy and left with an understanding of American affluence. They entered as enemies and exited as future partners. The sustenance dispensed within American POW camps did more than merely preserve life. It altered perspectives. Every generous serving eroded the foundations of Nazi ideology. Every sweet course dismantled propaganda. Every quart of milk annihilated the myth of American feebleness. The captives were subdued not by scarcity but by surplus, not by harshness but by benevolence. Ultimately, America's most formidable instrument was not the atomic bomb, but the apple pie. Not the Sherman tank, but the chocolate bar. Not the B-7 bomber, but the beefsteak. The German POWs were subdued by their intake, vanquished by their desserts, conquered by their vegetables. They had anticipated discovering a nation weakened, fractured, and on the precipice of collapse. Instead, they unearthed an agricultural titan capable of feeding its adversaries more effectively than Germany could nourish its own populace. They witnessed the arsenal of democracy, but more crucially, they tasted the abundance it represented. The transformation was absolute and enduring. These men returned to Germany not as vanquished foes, but as adherents to prosperity, proponents of plenty, and evangelists of what was possible. They had glimpsed the future, and it was delectable. Their story serves as a potent reminder that sometimes the most significant triumphs are achieved not on fields of battle, but within mess halls, not through destruction, but through munificence, not by breaking bodies, but by filling stomachs. The German prisoners of war, who marveled at the prospect of consuming meat, fruit, and chocolate within American enclosures, came to realize that democracy's paramount strength lay not in its capacity for devastation, but in its power to create. Not in its authority to punish, but in its ability to provide. They arrived with empty bellies and departed replete, not solely with food, but with novel horizons for their nation's potential trajectory. Within their metamorphosis lay the genesis of the Atlantic Alliance, the Marshall Plan, and the Pacific prosperous Germany that would rise from the ruins. The men who had once marched in support of the Third Reich returned home as champions of agriculture, prophets of prosperity, and witnesses to the potency of a society capable of transforming adversaries into friends through the elegantly revolutionary act of sharing its abundance. They had sampled America, and their existence would never again be the same.